General Vespasian and his oldest son Titus were given the assignment to go to Judea and put down the Jewish revolt. The general's younger son was Domitian. He was about 18 years old and was under the care of his uncle in Rome, who was a senator. Suddenly, Nero died. So the Senate selected a new emperor who was the Roman governor of Spain. Without them knowing, this was the beginning of a civil war known in history as the Year of Four Emperors. Sure enough, 6 months later, that emperor was dead, and a new one was selected. He was the Roman governor of Portugal. At the same time, there was a Roman commander in Germany who was moving his army towards Rome for the purpose of becoming emperor himself. And 3 months later, he was. Vespasian knew that he was not fit for that job. He knew if left alone, he could ruin the empire. So he figured for the good of the empire, he should just become emperor himself. He set out his plans. He sent 2 legions towards Rome with the idea that some more would join them in Europe. He left Titus in charge of putting down the Jewish revolt. He himself went to Egypt to cut off the food supply for Rome. Immediately, there was fighting in the streets of Rome against those who were in favor that the commander remain as emperor and those who wanted Vespasian become emperor. Well, the young 18-year-old boy and his uncle were not safe. They were both close relatives to Vespasian. They went into hiding. One day before the conflict was over, the senator was killed, and Domitian had to run for his life. So the Senate selected Vespasian to be the next emperor. He was number 4 for that year. But he was in Egypt and wouldn't get there for 9 months. And his oldest son Titus was still had Jerusalem under siege. So they asked the 18-year-old son to stand in the place of the family as Caesar until his father could be there. Vespasian's general actually ran things and made sure that the young man didn't take advantage of the situation. He even joked that, I hope when I get there, my son will allow me to become emperor. Well, in the new administration, Domitian was given minor tasks, mostly for show. These had a lot of honor to them, but very little responsibility, compared to Titus, who was second to his father, who helped rule the country. He was being groomed to become the next emperor. Both he and his father said that Domitian wasn't really fit to become emperor. But years later, when Titus finally did become emperor, he died of a fever suddenly. And Domitian was made emperor of Rome. He was totally unprepared. Still, despite that, in his early years, he proved to be a pretty good leader. He was fair when he dispensed justice. He had a focus on the economy to make it strong, and he did that. He set up a system of investigation so they would investigate financial mismanagement, which brought about historic low levels of corruption among the governors and elected officials. The people of Rome loved him, mainly because he was able to rebuild all of the public buildings in Rome that had been destroyed by two major fires and the street fighting. In fact, compared to all the other emperors since the first one, he was the best builder, except for Augustus himself. The army liked him. Because of his strong financial base, he was able to give them raises. He never really actually led the army into battle, but he had a way of showing up in the battle zone to encourage the troops, and they liked that. Well, despite all the good things that he did, he had an attitude that would eventually kill him 15 years later. He exercised absolute power, which made the Senate obsolete. He personally believed that Rome should be ruled by an absolute monarch. Oh, the Senate hated him, and their hatred grew the longer he was in power. To make things worse, he lacked the charisma of Augustus. He lacked the charisma of his father and his brother. No, he came across as cruel, sadistic, self-centered. On top of that, he felt, since he had absolute power, that he could execute anyone he wanted to. He executed senators that didn't agree with him and wouldn't go along with his policies. He executed an actor that he didn't like. Oh, the list goes on of all the unusual people that he executed just because he could. The people in Rome were in fear of saying something or doing something that would condemn them to death. He went down in history as a terrible dictator. Still, among all of the bad Caesars, he was not lewd, he was not lustful, he was not self-indulgent. No, in fact, he tried to reinstate Augustus's moral standard, which means that a man who committed adultery would be sent into exile. He was faithful to his wife. Well, there was that rumor about him and his niece, but that was probably just a rumor. He was given the title of Lord and God. He dropped the God part because he knew he was not a god. He preferred what Augustus said, that he was the son of a god, Julius Caesar. For him, he was the son of his father, who now had been granted the position of God. He was a son of a god, and his brother was a god. He felt, as a son of God, he didn't need the Senate to bring forth a glorious kingdom. Well, to enhance this concept, he needed what was called a temple warrant. This was a city that would be selected to build the temple for the imperial cult of his family. A lot of cities applied for this job, but he chose Ephesus because it was halfway between the east and the west. Oh, they were pleased. They were pleased. They built a huge temple. On the second floor, they put a 27-foot statue of him. It was the first thing people saw when they came into the port, or when they came from the east on the trade routes. It was important for him, for everyone in Ephesus, to proclaim him as Lord. This was the beginning of the second persecution of Christians. It started with Augustus, who said that you could worship any god you wanted to, in any way you wanted to, as long as you would say that Caesar was Lord. There was no Caesar that actually was interested in enforcing that law until you come to Domitian. He was just the guy for it. After all, he was able to set up a system to keep the corruption among the governors low. He could do this as well. He used the agora. Now, the agora was, for any city, it was the Roman center of activity. It's where people came and they sold and they bought, they met with their family, they met with friends, they could give political speeches, the philosophers could talk about their philosophy. Well, the one in Ephesus was especially nice. Matter of fact, Paul went there every day to convince people that Christ was the Messiah, the Savior of the world. Domitian put a incense stand at each of the entrances. To be able to go in, you have to take a little bit of incense and put it on the burner. That was your way of saying, Domitian is Lord. They would then put an ink spot on you showing that you had done that, which means you could go in there and participate. You could buy things or sell things or meet with family. Christians had a hard time with this. It brought up a controversy among Christians. The Nicolaitans believed that, well, we know that's not true. We know that in our heart. So what does it matter? We put a little bit of incense into a burner. I mean, it doesn't mean anything. Well, most of the Christians didn't agree with this. They did not want to publicly proclaim anyone to be Lord except for Jesus. That meant they were blocked from going into the agora. Meant they were separated from family. They couldn't meet together with friends. It meant that they couldn't buy or sell anything except among themselves outside of the agora. It also led to persecution for different leaders and governors and city officials who wanted to impress the Caesar. They would martyr Christians. Domitian realized that he had a problem here. He met with the pastor of Ephesus, the Apostle John, and tried to reason with him about this thing. John would have none of it. This made the emperor angry. He commanded that John be boiled in oil. To his amazement, John didn't die. Matter of fact, he wasn't even hurt. It shook him up a little bit. He said, well, if I can't kill you, I'll send you into exile to the Isle of Patmos. With that, he went back to Rome. He would be dead a year and a half later. Once he got to Rome, he realized that his niece and his cousin had become atheists. That was their word for Christians because they didn't believe in all the gods. Well, he had the cousin executed, and he sent his niece into exile. In the last months of his life, he became extremely paranoid, thinking that people were sneaking up on him to try to kill him, which is probably true. He took the walls, the marble walls of his palace, and he had them shine and polish so much that he could see behind him as he walked down down the hallways. It's a mystery in history why the persecution of Christians just abruptly ended. Well, there's a story about the grandsons of Jude, the one who wrote the epistle in the New Testament, who was the half-brother of Jesus. It is said that Domitian was so paranoid that he heard that a descendant of King David would rule the world. Well, he didn't want that to happen. So he decided to kill all the descendants of David. He then heard that there were 2 farmers that lived nearby that were descendants of David. So he had them called to come to him. He asked them, "Are you a descendant of David?" Yes, yes, we are. He looked at them. They looked pretty poor, and they said, well, what are you worth financially? Oh, they said, well, everything we have is all tied up in our little farm. We farm that, and what we get from it, we pay our taxes, and then we live on the rest. He held out his hands to show the emperor that they were rough, and they were just hard-working farmers. He said, well, have you heard about this teaching that a descendant of King David will rule the world? Oh, yes, it's true, it's true. But it's already happened. You see, our grandfather is the half-brother of Jesus. He is the one who is a descendant of David who will rule the world, but his kingdom is not of this world. It's a spiritual kingdom. He is Lord and lives in each of his followers. Well, when Domitian heard this, he understood it a little bit better, so he sent him home. He then brought back his niece from exile, and the Christian persecution was over. Shortly after that, he was killed by his servants and a member of the Praetorian Guard. The Senate hated him so much that they tried to erase his memory from Roman history. Still, the cultural, economic, and political systems that he set up brought about peace through the entire 2nd century. 30 years after he died, 80 to 90% of all the people that lived in Ephesus were Christian.